Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If I could please ask you to come a bit forward. You're not going to be forward with me, but you're going to come front, should I say. Okay, so, okay. We got just about an hour, or just under an hour. That's what Denzel tells me. So let's make the most of the time that we have. Thank you for your attendance in this workshop. The intention was to run it as a workshop per se, and not for you to hear my voice for the next hour, hour and a half, because we were supposed to start at 11:30 until 1 o'clock. But let's, so to speak, play it by ear, and let's try to come up with some positive outcomes from this session, where we could actually add value to possibly the recommendations going forward. Okay. What I'm going to initially do is make some general comments and my thoughts. Some of you may have heard my thoughts yesterday when we did the panel discussion with Joanne Joseph, with Lumkum Tinder, as well as Franklin Hayes. And thanks to Franklin for joining us again. He's just checking whether I'm doing a good job this afternoon. So thanks, Franklin. And you can just add, I mean, your expertise in the community radio sector is very much appreciated. Just to say to you, the topic for the workshop is radio raising the African rain. And it's about putting Africa first. Not just South Africa, but how can we work from an African context? And I think that's very, very important. And by the way, with technology growing almost daily, we have the potential to cover the whole of the continent, not just South Africa. And we can talk about that in a short while. Okay. As I said a few minutes ago, I wanted to keep the session interactive as possible, but let's see how it goes in terms of time. I got some topics that I put on my last slide. I should say to you, I had 120 slides to portray, but because Denzel said you only have an hour, so I brought it down to 50 slides. Now I'm only joking. To be honest with you, I only got about 4 slides, because remember I said to you, it's a workshop. So let's, and please interrupt me if you want. You know, just put your hand up and we'll get the microphone to you, and we can clarify, or you can add comments and correct what I'm saying and tweak what I'm saying. I'm very easy with that. I think very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we're in a digital era. We must not forget that. I like the comments from this morning whereby the future is in our hands. And when I say the future is in our hands, we have the opportunity, we have the strength, we have the competence, we have the skill to create something for ourselves. And when I say for ourselves, I'm not just talking South Africa, but I'm talking Africa. And I think that's very important. When I talk about technology, some of you may have heard about Digital Radio Mondial, which has gone great guns in India at the moment. The last I heard that there's about 900 million travelers who have access to DRM, Digital Radio Mondial, on the sets. And Digital Radio Mondial doesn't only cater for audio, it caters for text, and it also caters for visuals. So we can probably use that as a teaching, as a research, and a knowledge production tool. And that's why I think it's important we get to grips with what it actually means. How do we decolonize? But when we talk about decolonization, I like the point made earlier on. How do we decolonize the mind firstly? Okay. How do we decolonize not just content, but processes in terms of getting the content out to our respective audiences across the country, across the continent? We talk about indigenous language. I said yesterday at the panel discussion, how do we preserve culture? our traditions, our norms. How should I say, how should we be kind of proud of what we do and how we do things, not relying on another country, another continent. Why are we shy? Somebody spoke about the use of language. I think Prof spoke about language. You know, you start in English and then you go into your mother tongue language. Why are we shy to adopt your mother tongue language? You know, somebody said yesterday there's 9 African languages which are recognized in the Constitution. Are we giving sufficient attention to those languages? I know SABC tries its best to do that, but I think the print sector has a bit of a challenge when it comes to the language issue. But something that I should have said yesterday, and I thought we got the workshop this morning, the issue of sign language. It's the 12th recognized language in our country, but have we done much to kind of promote sign language? My feeling is that sign language, or should I say those affected by sign language, or using sign language, should I say, should not only be consumers and recipients of audio broadcasts, but they should also play a role in becoming content creators. And I think, you know, you alluded to that yesterday, Franklin, and maybe you want to comment about that. But the point I'm making here is that government, the country recognizes the 12th language, I think around about June last year, but I haven't seen any kind of movement in that regard. And it's something that we really need to take seriously. And when I talk about languages as well, are we kind of speaking, so to speak, the kitchen language, or we're speaking real language, how it should be spoken? And the thing is, remember, a child growing up listens to you and I at home, and they mimic how we speak and the language that we use, the slang, the colloquialism, etc., etc. So let's get our language correct, let's get it right, let's get it accurate in more ways than one. I talk about inclusivity, and it's about the disabled community. I mentioned sign language. I enjoyed Ashley's presentation yesterday, a lot of food for thought about the blind. But women, you know, there's far too few women who are in leadership positions in broadcast. Yes, there are women as presenters, as producers on radio, but far too few who are in leadership positions. I don't know whether you got the stat, Franklin, but I know, not a good example I may add, but in the US, there's only 11% of women in leadership positions on radio stations. And I think that's in itself speaks volumes. But, you know, I'm not saying we must be at 11%, we must be more than 11%. You know, I don't have a problem if women on leadership positions is 70, 80% compared to men. But the point of the matter, we need to create the opportunity for them. And I think that's a critical element. And the point of the matter here is that women see things differently than men. And when they're in leadership and governance positions, they would be probably more compassionate, see things in a more positive light, and I suppose women become more enabling for their presenters, their producers, and the team that works around them. So I think that's an important point that we should pick up in our discussion in a short while. Just to general comments, and pardon me if you know these kind of things, but I just want to make some general comments. You know, radio is a charming medium. Yes?
Inclusivity and everything regarding, you spoke about women, you spoke about youth. I don't know, in the issue of inclusivity, do you also include the issues of queer and LGBTI people with regards to the definition of inclusivity in terms of language as well, since you spoke about language? Thank you.
Thank you for that point. When I talk about inclusivity, I'm talking about equality amongst all citizens, everybody. And I must make this point, and I've made it several times before, and I don't make any apology for repeating myself. Far too many people in our country are still living on the margins of society. We need to bring them to the middle and to be treated as real citizens. Whether it's in terms of resources, whether it's in terms of sexual orientation, whether it's gender, disability, whatever the issue is, equality should rule supreme. And the point of the matter, you know, and people like Franklin will tell you as well, when you adopt that attitude, you make your programming richer on a radio station, or for that matter, on a television station, okay? And the point I may add, we learn as we go along. Those people can contribute, you know, to wonderful programming. I mean, you know, somebody made the point yesterday, I think, was it Lunko? Why do we celebrate Human Rights Day? You know, many of our children, many of our youth don't know the real reason. And that's where we need to engage in these kind of programs, podcasts, panel discussions, you know, lectures, annual lectures, seminars, workshops, etc., etc. Somebody asked the question this morning about dignity, you know, and so, you know, the point of the matter, I asked you about climate change, and you said you know everything about climate change. I said, well, you got 5 minutes. And she only speaks for 30 seconds, you know. So, you know, I have a saying, always assume your assumption is wrong, okay? Don't assume you know things until you really know them, you know. And it's a question about literacy. It's about reading, and I may also add, the more we read, the better we communicate, the better we write, and more importantly, the better we listen when we are literate and we read, okay? Mind you, talking about reading, and I don't want to talk about the print media sector, but there's a growth in production of publications in the country. Biographies, memoirs, fiction and non-fiction. And we need to take advantage of that. But the point again is that, is it only English or Afrikaans or isiZulu? What about the other African languages? And we need to promote those African languages. By the way, I'd also like to see some of those African language textbooks or fiction or non-fiction being actually translated into English or into Afrikaans for that matter. Because we often talk about English into isiZulu. Why not the other way around? Okay, so that English-speaking people could learn more about the African languages. And I think that's important. But again, translation is an important point. We need experts in translation. You know the source language and the target language, where you miss the impact of what somebody is saying when they don't translate accurately and use the most appropriate words. Okay? I spoke about media literacy. Yesterday I spoke about the complementary relationship. For those of you who missed the session yesterday, just to repeat, as much as I talk radio, I kind of advocate and an activist for the complementary relationship between all media platforms, okay? You would appreciate that radio is theater of the mind. In other words, we say radio has a cinematic feel to that, because you paint the own pictures in your mind. If I say Jane was taken to hospital, was she taken in a car, was she taken in an ambulance, what was the state of her mind or physically or whatever the case may be, which hospital, but you're building those pictures, so it's a cinematic feel. Radio comes from the print media, because when you have short stories, when you have documentaries, when you have adverts, it comes from the print media, it comes from the written word. And so digital media, which we spoke about shortly, earlier should I say, and also stills photography. Whether it's on digital media or whether it's the mainstream media, those 5 platforms coexist. So as much as, you know, I talk radio at this workshop with radio, link it with others. I was talking last night and I was saying to Lunko, why don't we bring community television into the mix to get our messages out to our broader society in South Africa? And I think that's an important point to keep in mind, the complementary relationship. Radio has been resilient. You know, so many times we had new devices, new technology, and everybody said, you know, the old thing about Buggles, video killed the radio star, but it hasn't really killed the radio star. Okay, we've had the cinema, we had PlayStations. You know the gadgets that your children can teach you and tell you about. But the point of the matter, radio has thrived and survived all these competing devices. And I think that's the beauty of radio. And as many of you would probably know, radio is the first medium that people listen to in the morning to get the latest news, information, and what's happening around the world. Okay, and that's not only in the developing world, but it's also an important point in the developed world, as in the West. So yes, radio has been resilient over the years, and I don't see radio kind of losing its appeal and attraction for at least the next few decades. I think radio is, when I talk about radio attributes, radio gives you companionship. You may be alone, but with radio, you're not lonely. All right? It's a companionship, it's a friendship. Radio is inexpensive to produce, inexpensive to advertise, and probably inexpensive to actually get a radio device to listen to. Radio is portable, okay? It's ubiquitous, in other words, it's everywhere. You can listen to the start of a song in your home in the morning, and you get into a car, you put the same station on, you listen to the song there, and between 8 and 9, Tula Seasway on SAFM is going to talk about a certain topic, and you go into your workplace. If you have a radio set in your office, you can listen to Tulas. And so the point of the matter is that radio has lots of attributes. The point also is that illiteracy is not a barrier, okay, to listen to radio. However, by listening to radio, and I say this with due respect, illiterate people become literate by listening to radio, okay? Radio has that powerful element. In other words, it has a double positive effect on illiterate people, because radio provides them access to information and news around the world. But however, in recent studies I've seen whereby people are saying radio makes them more literate than they really are, okay, because of formal education, informal and non-formal education. So we can argue that point down the line. I think Lumko mentioned the point yesterday about COVID-19. Listenership in South Africa and around the world of radio shot really up. I mean, because the programming on radio stations was adapted for the listener, which doesn't normally happen. Under normal circumstances, the program manager, the CEO, the chairman of the board policies look at what's good for them, especially commercial radio. But commercial radio also moved away from its comfort zone during COVID-19 and changed the programming. There was no breakfast show during COVID, okay? Because there was no breakfast, so to speak, okay? Breakfast shows was between 10 and 11 and 12. There was no traffic news, and etc. No surfing news on some of the stations because nobody was allowed out. So radio became the companionship for many a person. But the point of the matter here is that radio has that ability to comfort people in the worst of times, okay? That's an important point to remember. That's number one. Number two, people want to listen to something that was familiar. A familiar voice, a familiar music, whether it's from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, okay? And also familiar programming. They don't want to listen to somebody who was kind of new to them, who's trying to preach them, but they want to listen to somebody who they trusted, like you trust your presenter on air. And sometimes it's not the quality of the program or the quality of the news bulletin, but it's the voice, the tone, the pace that you enjoy listening to. And so that's where, during COVID, radio really became a hit in many people's eyes and ears, so to speak. But I must also add that when we talk about radio, the important thing to bear in mind here, people become familiar with a different style, whether it's the style of the station or whether it's the style of the personality. And I think that's a critical element to keep in mind as well. But again, it comes back to the point of familiarity. I put the 34.9 million listeners, that's the last figure that I've heard in South Africa. Bearing in mind we have about 1.5 billion people on the African continent, the listenership figure on the African continent is probably between 800 million to a billion. And that's the potential for radio. And we need to exploit that, not just for entertainment, but also for education and for information, okay? So that's an important point. Programming of the station, which I mentioned a short while ago, is what we call the software of the station, okay? Are we being real? Are we being relevant? Are we being authentic? Are we giving the listener what he or she wants to listen to? And I think that's an important point. Do we conduct research? Do we conduct action research to find out what the person wants to listen to, whether it's music, whether it's entertainment, whether it's education, whether it's just pure information, whether it's development news in a country like South Africa. But are we listening to the listener? So, which brings me, somebody said to me, we haven't seen your book, and sorry, Prof. This is the cover of the book, and I titled the book, My Radio Memory, Listening to the Listener, where I gave the listener an opportunity to talk about their stories. So I got 100 listeners from around the country to write their stories. And so, and by the way, the Archbishop of Cape Town, Thabo Makgoba, he calls me once and he says, do I qualify? I said, but Arch, do you listen to radio? He says, yes. I said, you qualify. You know, so, and so, in a way, and not to sound patronizing, but in a way, in a sense, that I wanted to give the listener an opportunity, a platform to speak his or her mind, or should I say write about what's in his or her mind. And to be honest with you, it was a fantastic journey because you learn a lot from the listener. You don't only learn from the presenter or the station manager or the chairman of the board, you learn from the listener, and I learned a hell of a lot from them as well. Got to prepare. And I put the words there. Do you go onto a show, onto a radio station to do a show, or you there for a shift? Are you there on radio for the money, or you going to do a show where you prepare? And to be honest with you, and we've had this discussion in the past, you can tell when somebody is winging it. There's no preparation. They're there just for the money or for the power, for the ego, okay? There's no back timing, there's no front announcing, they're crashing over lyrics of songs, etc., etc. And I think, if I may say so, this is one of the biggest problems we have with radio, not just in South Africa, but other parts of the world, okay? And I put there at the bottom, quality. Are there air checks by managers of stations? You know, and air checks is but one example, but there's other quality checks that they can engage in and you know, make the station much more listenable, so to speak, okay? Research, I can't sufficiently stress the point of research. It's research, 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 okay? People you ask, you know, you work for 3 hours a day and you got nothing else to do for the other, 21 hours in a day. And the point of the matter, sometimes a 3-hour show, the research is probably around about 5 hours for a good show, okay? I mean, you know, I grew up listening to a station called Capital Radio, and I learned the good habits. And so you prepare, you research the artists. You know what you're going to say, and you say what you know. Okay, that's the first thing to bear in mind. But the other point that I picked up as well, you know, is to familiarize yourself with as many topics as possible. And you got to read. You got to become literate. Very important. Without kind of taking a dig at any particular station in our country, I was told that when you do a link, you only speak for 30 seconds maximum. How many times you went into a store to buy bread, milk, and the guy is saying the same thing, okay, in one link? That's not good radio, you know. So, you know, these are basics which we need to get right. And the important point to bear in mind here is that you get people who mention the names 3 or 4 times in one link, or the station name. In other words, they're actually not listening to themselves. Okay? So, you know, like I said to you, these are basic points, but, you know, we call it flow in and flow out. Flow in is getting extra listeners. But what you want flow in, people joining the station, your show, and you want flow through. How do you retain flow through? Is by keeping it relevant, keeping it simple, and keeping it basic. And the point of the matter, you know, keep it simple. You don't have to sound too smart. The listener is smart enough to pick up what you are saying, and they'll appreciate what you're saying in a few words, as opposed to taking 5 minutes to say one simple point. And just to finish off the point about the presentation as well. How many times you've listened to a presenter who's speaking about 5 minutes and he's told you about 3 or 4 different things? You forgot the first thing he said. He speaks about the promo, he speaks about we appearing at an outside broadcast during Easter weekend, and we're running a competition. You forgot what he said, the first link. And the idea is that one idea, one link. Very important, okay? And again, this will also apply to education. It'll also apply to research and knowledge production. Keep it simple, keep it to one point. I can't stress sufficiently again the need for local issues to be kissing. The story is not in another province, in another country. The province is in your own suburb, your own township, your own urban area, peri-urban or rural area. Okay? The story is there. We just got to keep our eyes and our ears open. And when I talk about local issues, I'm talking about things like climate change, rhino poaching, water, light, sanitation. Okay? Have we sufficiently addressed that? Or are those issues being swept under the carpet? Okay? And that's the beauty of local journalism, where you cover the stories which affect people. And we often ask the question, what is news? News is something that is new, the person does not know about, but ought to know about. Okay? Because ought to know about, it affects his lifestyle and his family's lifestyle. Okay? The next point about talent acquisition. I don't know what's your point, Franklin, but the point of the matter, I don't believe the radio industry, the broadcast industry is investing sufficiently enough in the talent search, the talent acquisition, and as well as training. Okay? I often speak to people and I'm talking commercial radio now, and say, wow, there's not enough talent in this country. I said, excuse me? Say that again? You know, the point of the matter, they want somebody like Prof to come there as a perfect presenter, offer him a wonderful salary, and he does a 3 to 6 show. You know, but they're not prepared to invest and go out. When last have you heard a commercial radio station embarking on an outside project, attracting talent? Okay? Nurturing talent, developing talent, having workshops, etc., etc. Okay? And mind you, and we touched upon it yesterday, whereby commercial radio, and including the SABC, will poach from the community radio sector. He does well on community radio station. Franklin knows at Josie FM, if I'm on his station and I'm doing well, tomorrow I'm going to be moving to SABC or one of the commercial stations. And I think that's a big problem because, you know, we talk about opportunities for youngsters in our country. We need to not only talk, we got to walk the talk and create the opportunities, creating an enabling environment, okay? And the point of the matter here is that you don't need to know me or the head of SABC or the head of Prime Media, etc., to get onto radio. If you have the potential, you should be given the opportunity. That's my view, okay? And there's wonderful talent in this country. You know, you speak to people in the outlying areas as well. They are smart, and and they're not as gullible as they were in the past because they're exposed to much more media platforms. So the point of making here is that the radio industry need to kind of get off and look for the talent. The talent is there. And obviously train. And I'm also not talking about training for new people. I'm also talking about refresher training. Okay? As you know, things change every day. And sometimes I hear some presenters using the same language which has changed. Okay? And by the way, not taking a dig at any station, timing is important. Okay? The 4 o'clock news is at not 1 minute past 4, it's at 4 o'clock. Because Prof has put on the radio, she's got the radio listening passively, but actively she switches on at 4 o'clock because she wants to hear the headlines of the news, and it's at 1 minute past 4. It's disrespect, okay? And by the way, there's a difference between time management and timing management. Okay, and I think the radio industry must actually wake up to that reality. Okay, so the point of the matter, I made these points just to kind of trigger a discussion. And you know, there's topics which I can show you in a short while, but I talk about innovation and sustainability, I talk about leadership and governance, and other topics. But I'd like for you to kind of comment on where are we at the moment, and how can radio be used as a tool for teaching, learning, knowledge production, not only using traditional media, but using the digital platforms that we have, not just in South Africa, but across Africa. So your comments, your input, I'm more than happy. I don't believe we have time and the opportunity to break into groups, but so let's have a discussion about these different topics that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. Yes.
I see that there's a UNISA radio, Prof. Are you guys? Yeah, but I mean you're streaming. And it's like 24-hour service? No. But you are. The short story is that
the short story is that that radio station was started from an academic department, which is the Department of Communication Sciences. Started off as a campus radio. We were able to then get a license from ICASA, and we were successful in terms of broadcasting. We do have 2 or 3 big names that came to that project. However, I think that when projects leave their origin and are taken over institutionally with other interests, I think that issues of priority fall on the wayside, to such an extent that that project eventually lost its broadcasting license by ICASA. Now it is just operating as a streaming platform, meaning that it has taken a step back in terms of where it should be. If you look at UNISA student community, we've got about 370,000 students. So you can just imagine the impact that we could be making by that radio platform alone. It's unfortunate, but this is where we're at.
Yeah, no, Prof, I actually am still excited, even if it's streaming, because analog is diminishing. And so there's still digital broadcasting that's coming. So when that opens up, there will be an opportunity for us to get a broadcasting license. But the service, I wanted to link to some of the stuff that was mentioned in the presentation is, for instance, the issue of local content and local news. Mostly we are being led by what news is or are. So we are being told this is news today. But I always say, from a community perspective, we create news. So we need to be able to start telling those good news stories about success and failure within our communities. So we are creating the agenda of what kind of content we are distributing. So what I'm saying is, I was just making an example of UNISA Radio, is that it's got a potential audience of 370,000. And that 370,000 for a radio station that can provide not just student information, but a little bit broader in terms of opportunities for students. And so you will attract an audience because they want to listen to what opportunities, which businesses are being interviewed in this demarcated slot. So it brings opportunities because that's what we graduates are sitting without jobs. So through a UNISA radio streaming program, we can bring those kind of opportunities on a weekly basis. And that's what I pick up from VOW. VOW just won the Campus Station of the Year, and they've been very innovative and creative. But they've got an analog station that's also streaming, but there's opportunities for us to start bringing those opportunities. There's an opportunity for us to start bringing that kind of information to a broader audience, the almost 400,000 plus the other graduates that's not employed. So around innovations and that's new topics. I need to talk to the previous ones. So on the previous ones, you also mentioned the thing about talent and training. So I wanted to just add to that to say that at the moment, talent and training is not only for people that's already employed within the sector, but it brings, the question would be, would UNISA also do some podcast? And if they do, that's where you start picking up talent. If you can start looking at these podcast content producers, and that's what radio is doing at the moment. They are trying to usurp and trying to get hold of these new talent that is exposed through podcasting platforms and trying to bring them into the radio station.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. I'm Rebecca from Department of Health Studies. I want to say thank you so much. Really, radio stations are very helpful in different communities. I have two challenges that you mentioned above 250 radio stations that are available yesterday, but seemingly they're working in silos. I don't know what's happening. There's no coordination, whatever is happening in other areas. Yes, I understand the different contexts, that they need to look at the context where they are and then try to address issues under the context. But most of the time when you go to health issues, they work in silos. Second one is that when you go to radio, we have a health calendar which indicate the specific dates that are very crucial in the whole world regarding health, challenges. For example, your TB Day, your World AIDS Day, and so it would be wise, for example, for radio stations not to address such issues and look at multidisciplinarity to say if they are engaging in such platforms, they don't only engage one person, at least involve team members that are taking place in that particular space. For example, in TB, they need to understand what is the role of a nurse in that particular area, a doctor, and so at least the team will be visible and try to address different issues. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your comment. I call it the double C. You mentioned the word context, and context is important together with content. And so we need to be kind of consciously thinking about content and relating to what you're raising at the moment. Yes, Prof. Sorry, Prof. Just to make a point before you speak. We need to pick up what he's talking about, and let's see how we can assist. I'm sure, UNISA being such a powerhouse, 370,000 students, I thought it was far less, but 370,000 students, radio can play such a powerful role in terms of education and information.
It does, including the fact that I think in terms of alumni, there's more than 1 million. So you can just have a look at the community that is out there, and that speaks to issues of sustainability as well, and the potential market that could be untapped there. Robin, yesterday, I think during the first presentation around the questions of AI, I think I forgot his name when the colleague was showing us, in terms of making movies using AI and so forth. And he was saying, he was making an argument around how AI, where Hollywood used to inject so many $1 million. With AI, you can make a movie in, using minimal funds. I'm not sure in terms of your opinion as to how artificial intelligence is a potential threat and an enabler for the radio industry. Because I'm looking at the question of jobs, obviously, and the risks around that when you make the content being generated by machines, but also in terms of what is going to happen in the next 100 years, as an example. Will the concerns around jobs be an issue? Because we really cannot say that AI should not be a factor in broadcasting, but how do we structure it in such a way that we maintain to a certain extent what we are familiar with and love, and allow technology to also play a role in the broadcasting sector, particularly in radio?
Thanks for that question, Prof. I put there about artificial intelligence, but just to answer your question directly, you can't ignore AI. You can't ignore growing new technology. Like Lumko said yesterday evening, we got to embrace AI. However, I'm a recorder saying this, and I'll keep saying this. You can't replace human connectivity. Okay? I say AI helps with efficiency, but effectiveness comes from people like you and I. Okay? So, my point being is that embrace AI, but be mindful of it. And I make a couple of points there. Should information be clearly identified as AI to combat fake news and fraud, as an example, which is, by the way, happening in China at the moment, okay? I put in the creative industries like music. There's copyright issues at the moment, okay? And the human, is it human or humane intelligence? Okay? And that's my point. And I put the press releases because the press release does the media, the broad media industry gets, are they AI generated? And the point of the matter is that whatever you read generated from AI, is it accurate? Because growing up and being in journalism, we often thought, and I thought my students over the years, over the decades, go to the source of the information. Whether it came from a press release or whether it came from a press agency, whether it's a SAPA back in the day, or Agence France Presse, or Reuters, or whoever, go to the source. Because with the source, you get accurate information and you get up-to-date information. As you well know, radio is the now medium. It's an immediate medium. So the point I'm making again, AI, we've got to rely on it to help efficiency, to kind of expedite processes, but I don't believe it's your answer to a presentation or programming as well. Was it a year ago that Heart FM in Cape Town spent, I think it was early in the morning, which is very interesting why they did early parts of the morning. I think it was between 3 and 4 or 4 and 5 in the morning. They had a full hour of AI-generated content with the presenter, the music, etc. By the way, and I say this with respect, I haven't heard a thing after that from Heart. So they probably realized, they did some research and realized it's not working. You can't replace the human voice. The words that I use, the contractions, the pitch, the tone, etc. Prof speaks the way he speaks. And the point of making it is that AI can't replace that. Prof, you want to say something?
Yes. No, I wanted to
Respond here.
respond to say, when we look into leadership and governance, sometimes we mess things out because the UNISA radio was in the department. The minute it moves, there were some issues died down. So, but we are willing to revive it. Leadership and governance affect how service delivery is done. And the comment on the listeners, I listened to different radio stations. I could see, I could hear, and also the LMS. It shows the way people respond. I listened to the Power, I don't want to say Power FM, I wanted to say Radio Talk show. I could hear when people respond. It goes now to disinformation and misinformation. If you invite the wrong speaker, I want us as the audience, how do we use radio to our advantage in terms of teaching and learning? Yeah, thanks.
I thought he's going to bring a mic. So thank you, Prof. Yes, definitely governance and leadership, but your last question in terms of how to use radio, and I think that's where we sometimes distance ourselves. We think that we are the audience. And that's the difference in mindset when it comes to radio. Radio, if we operate a radio station, we are only a channel. The content that comes on that channel, we need to find from our audience. And so that engagement is a very dynamic one. So in fact, with Josie, we're going to go on a roadshow now to go and listen to our listeners, to ask, if you listen to us, are you happy? What kind of content should we stop? What should we do more? So I think that is critical, that community engagement that's needed. From a listener perspective is that you have key role players, and when I said yesterday that we exist in a development ecosystem, it means that there's an ecosystem that's very dynamic. The one is dependent on the other. And so if one of those components doesn't deliver, it can bring death to the whole ecosystem. So it's so critical for us to understand that as an academic institution, we do have a critical role to play when it comes to using these channels. It's just a channel. It's one of the channels that we will be using. So that's very, very critical to think of innovation. How do we reach an audience that's fixated on social media? How do we link those things? And that's the success story of radio. He mentioned that in his earlier slide, where he was saying that how radio has been able to usurp these technologies and make it work. So it adds value. It's a value add rather than a detraction. So I think that's very critical. Leadership and governance, I think, I don't know, we're going to but if you may, what happened normally is that the regulator wants to see leadership and governance, but from an organic development point of view, in the community or at the radio station, commercial is fine because there's money going into, so they make sure that those things are on point. But with community and campus, you sometimes find that we do not put the mechanisms in terms of the guarantees that's needed for the ownership and control of this public resource. Because it's a public resource and we don't view it as such. We sometimes think it's just our project, but it actually becomes a public resource from a public interest point of view. So I think Robin has got quite a few points. We were talking earlier about how to bring that into, the broader frame of how people think when they look at radio, and how do we build capacity in that.
Prof, just to respond to you, one day with UNISA radio being off air is one day too long. So I think he got enough resource of here. I'm sure Denzel will give you my contact details. More than happy to help. It's not about, so to speak, due respect, power and ego and whatever. It's about our people. it's about our students, it's about our graduates. Prof made a good point about alumni, okay? So, you know, can you imagine an alumni from UNISA goes and say, oh, by the way, what's your radio station called from where you were? And he says, no, but you know, we need to sort that out. And I'm sure there's ways and means of sorting that out. Yes, sorry.
I only have a question about the numbers that you mentioned earlier on listeners, how many listeners there are. And I want to know how many listeners listen on analog and how many are on the internet. Because we have analog radio, we have hybrid broadcasting, and then we have internet radio as well. So I'm curious about the relationship, especially on the African continent, and also what is the practice around internet radio.
So just to say to you, the numbers that I quoted there, the 34.9 million, is from what we call traditional radio. It's not internet radio. Okay, it's you heard yesterday. There's about close on to 300 radio stations in the country, and that combines commercial, community, and the SABC radio. It's very difficult to measure how many people are listening online. It's not measured accurately, but there's a sizable amount. But there's a problem with online radio because it's not regulated. You don't need a license to be online. And that's in South Africa at the moment.
Okay, but what about traditional radio stations that do stream online also? Because they have listeners, expat listeners across the world, which also is an interesting phenomenon.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because there's so much of interest in this book from expats. It's unbelievable. So they write to me and said, I said, where do you? He said, no, we listen to the station on streaming. But again, that 34.9 million doesn't take those people into account. Okay. Sorry, you had a point here.
Thank you, colleagues. My name is Paseka. From the Department of Anthropology and Archaeology. I wanted to speak to the point that Prof raised, Prof Nkosi specifically regarding using radio for teaching and learning. And I think it's such an important topic, especially at the age that we live in now, because it is something, if used correctly, that can explore a very different avenue in how do you actually do teaching and learning. But for me, I'm of a very peculiar position because we live in an age of misinformation and disinformation, and we find that those who misinform and disinform have been pushed into the mainstream. A few years ago, 10 years ago, these people would be found in the dark shadows of the internet, where you have all these conspiracies, where you have all this information about people being killed on a regular basis, unprovoked on the streets, you know. They would be there, they would be hiding, you'd have to find them. But now these people have been pushed towards the mainstream, and that is very problematic because now if I am going to use the radio, unless I'm teaching about disinformation and misinformation, you know, if that's a topic that I'm teaching on, then yeah, that it makes sense. But if I'm going to use the radio and try to direct my students more into talk radio, specifically engaging with it, there is every chance that I might be pushing a student who was already on the edge because of the internet into believing that information is formalized. And that makes it a bit tricky, and I think that is why we have to be very careful, especially at the age that we're currently in now. We have people who have international media, international ears, who can be heard throughout the world, misinforming the rest of the world, where if you were in the other part of the world, you'd think in South Africa, things are so hostile, everything is falling apart, you know, if you don't have access to everyone else. You know, you think wherever I see a white person, I kill them. You know, you would think everyone's land is taken away and whatnot. But that's a basis of misinformation, and these people are given a platform, and that makes it very difficult for me because I don't think that you should be muting people, but I think that you should be very careful in how you navigate platforming these people, because if you give them too much power, you find yourself in the position that we find ourselves in. Our relationship with the US is deteriorating. I do believe, though, that it's not necessarily a matter of disinformation or misinformation, but more of the case against Israel, more than anything. But I just wanted to point to the point that expert opinions, that's how we can use radio for teaching and learning, because you find ourselves in a position, especially, as I said, when you're listening to a lot of talk radio. I personally, I struggle with any other radio, but talk radio. But when you find yourself in talk radio, you have these experts, they speak to specific topics that if you're a teacher, especially us in the human sciences, where they speak to things that we actually teach. If you're able to direct students, because now they're also going towards the path of podcasting or recorded apps. What do they call them? Apps, where you can go onto the radio's app and you'll find these recordings. I think that's a strategic way to use it. But you would also be very careful. You would also need to be very careful about the direction in which you direct your students, because they see you as the expert. When you direct them towards a direction and then they get there and they find a person who's very problematic in their discourse, then you are in trouble. So yeah, I just wanted to speak to that. Thanks, colleagues.
One word, which I had on the previous slide: quality. Quality in, quality out. However, and I'm sure the both professors will agree with me, you got to provide the enabling environment, the counseling support, because everybody is not the same. And so, if they got a problem, they will obviously be referred to a particular agency or particular department, etc. But it's about quality. And I like your point about experts, and people who are listening to your radio station are smart. They know when somebody is fobbing or speaking lies or misrepresenting or being honest as well. Okay, so but very good point. Again, it's about quality, right across the spectrum.
I want to jump over to the other topic of AI and broadcasting, but specifically in the context of podcasting. I listened to a podcast, Steve Bartlett's podcast, where he interviewed an ex-Google CEO. And the CEO gave a demonstration of how far AI has advanced in terms of creating spoken content and how convincing the spoken word is. And he suggested to Steve to create an alternative revenue income by using AI to create podcasts where they criticize Steve Bartlett's original podcasts, which I found like this is mind-boggling, but that's a kind of capitalist use of AI to generate more income, and then target a completely different listening market. So I don't know. This is quite an interesting field.
Is it about quality or is it about quantity? And I think that's the important point. My view is that focus on the quality, the quantity will take care of itself. And I think quality often will rule. Just to come back to your point earlier, you were talking about talk radio and talk issues. I was chatting to the person who pioneered talk radio in South Africa, a gentleman called Stan Katz, not long ago. And he was saying to me the number of engagements that they had with listeners, potential listeners, their own staff and other people as to what we should cover on 702 when they pioneered talk radio. It wasn't an easy discussion, but his innovative idea paid off. And that's when they attracted the late John Burks and all those, the John Robbies of the world and John Perlmans and what have you, So yeah, I mean, again, what I said earlier on is, you don't wing it. You don't take a chance. Take a calculated risk, but do your homework, research. And there's a saying, engage your mind before you engage your mouth. And that should apply to every radio presenter, not only in South Africa, but around the world.
Around the AI issue is in the more developed markets, what they are doing at the moment, they are utilizing, you were saying effective and efficient. Eh? So what they are doing now is to utilize AI with efficiency. So what that means is that because you are on a digital platform broadcasting, you can actually start tracking big data around audiences. And then you start mining the big data that can help again with your sales strategy and your marketing strategy. And so what these stations in more advanced markets in Europe is doing is they have now developed parallel programming. So it's parallel content. So it comes to the kind of point that you're raising about using AI to develop this out-of-the-box kind of content. So what they are doing is they use the big data to look at which component in our audience can't we cater for in our main broadcast, and then develop parallel streams from the same radio channel, but on different platforms. So I think that definitely is the future, but what it does, it multiply your income streams. So it creates more income opportunity.
Just a quick one again for me, and I think it goes back to the point about the skills and the training that we are assisting with. So whether it's your traditional communication, media studies, and journalism schools that teach, broadcasting skills with an intention that the students would, eventually make their mark in these areas, whether it's your radio broadcasting, television broadcasting, or any other new areas in new media. There is a challenge around the skills that we are attracting and the skills that we are seeing working in these industries. So, for instance, you find that the people who are growingly being employed are your so-called celebrities. So people who have a certain following, for instance, on social media. I won't mention names, but you find that, I don't know whether it's because the platforms are desperate to attract numbers, but you find that there is a trend of certain personalities being put particularly in your big and market attracting slots, your breakfast show, your afternoon slot. I don't know if you have any comment around that.
To state upfront, I don't believe influencers make good radio presenters. Okay, I must say that upfront. I was asked to do a presentation to the SABC, all its business managers and station managers and PR and marketing. It was April last year. And I was asked this very same question. Robin, what's your thought? And I said what I just said to you. And everybody was showing me the thumbs up. I can see it on my, on the screen. And they said, why? I said, at the end of the day, is she tuning in to listen to what you got to say, or listening because you're an influencer? So are people listening attentively and intently to your show? No. They're listening because you attracted 70,000 people at your show on Saturday night. That's why they're listening to you. That is not sustainable, And I honestly don't agree with that. And that's coming to bite a lot of radio stations. And by the way, advertisers are moving away from those shows because of the so-called influencer/presenter. And it's problematic. Yes.
Thank you. I'm just piggybacking on this question and the comment you said. This morning I was fortunate actually to engage with Franklin, and we are talking about some of these things. One of the things was, how can radio become a public space now that many people have become, I would say, digitally literate? That a radio should actually not focus mainly on entertainment, but information, especially during the day when people are busy working and when they're coming back. A lot has happened during the day. And yet, on radio, what you find is not educational during the day. It's more music, very little of information. And when I'm driving back home, I have missed out on what was happening throughout the country. And in the evening, I don't have time to also go and listen to most of what is said. And you were talking about influencers not really being good presenters and all of that. And I think that's the problem that we are having with radio in South Africa, that people with knowledge and information don't get to occupy that public space, which is the radio. And yet it's people that are influencers, so-called celebrities and all of that, who go and present mainly music, stories of what they have, what is it that they do when they are outside or out there in their own little corners. So I think radio needs to actually be reconfigured so that it basically become relevant. For me, I think it's irrelevant towards advancing digital humanities if it has less information and more entertainment. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'll respond by saying this. I've said it before, I'm not scared to say it again. There are far too many people who don't have the experience and expertise about radio that are occupying prime positions. And I'm talking management, okay? And I think that's an issue to keep in mind. I said this in an article I wrote in the 1990s. Radio must not be a means to an end. You've got to have the intellectual curiosity and the passion, etc., etc. And that's problematic. I mean, you speak to a program manager, he can't tell you what's his job. He doesn't quite know what's his job, but he's just there. It's providing a shift as opposed to doing his work. So that's the one point. The second point, you know, and people are talking to me from the radio industry, are saying these influences are coming in and they're now delegating upwards. So they're telling the program manager and the station manager how the station should be run. And that's problematic, you know. And by the way, they're promoting their own side businesses. And that's also problematic. So you're right. So there's multiple problems with that. You can have the figures, but the figures are not going to sustain. We talk about sustainability. You know, you could be the biggest radio station today, tomorrow you're gone. You know, so you've got to be very careful of that. And again, like I keep saying, and I keep using the Q word, quality. Quality counts. Quality matters. Like I said yesterday, facts matter. Quality matters.
Sorry, Prof, you know, you made me think about something that is important that we haven't, I don't know if we spoke to or we didn't touch on, but it was the idea, the narrative actually of anti-intellectualism. So what I've come to notice is that we live in an age where if you are an intellect or you are someone who speaks of specific subject matter which is seen as intellectual, you are pushed to the outcast. You become an outcast. And what that does is that it means those people who now do what is fashionable, what is trendy, what is happening right now, you have this popularity on social media, become platformed. And for me, I think that there's a direct relationship between the two, where we have this age of anti-intellectualism resulting in this age of influencers being put and being platformed everywhere, whether it's on television, whether it's on the social media, where social media pushes them itself, and on the radio. And that is very problematic, because now what happens is that these specific subject matters that we speak into of misinformation, this quality that you speak to becomes, you know, less important. It loses its value. And that is very problematic, because What happens for me is that now we have a responsibility as educators slash as lecturers to now play the role of educating on where to find information that has quality. Because what happened over the last few years, I don't know whether it's artificial intelligence, the misuse of artificial intelligence, or the lack of access to information. I've started to see that students now come to academic spaces to do their assessments, do their tests, and they do not use academic sources. So that on its own, the direction in which people get information, our students specifically, means that they become the people who will now take information that they value as quality information from influencers, not those who have the quality to speak to specific subject matter. And I think we need to speak to that, and we need to address it as teachers ourselves. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Last comment.
Yeah, thanks. The executive dean asked how can we use radio for teaching and learning, and I think others also ask on that. I think it should be change. If we accept change, as you mentioned, UNISA radio, for example, the campus radio can be tools to be used to introduce this change, that programming and scheduling around that, those stations is done through the departments that are there, the special programs that are there. Because public radios are recruiting from campus radio, then they are coming with this change. The presenters to SABC, for example, to 702, that they've learned from campus radio. So if it's music only on campus radio, they come with that to commercial radio or public radio. So you mentioned a very important point that campus radio can be used as those tools to change. Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the close. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your support. You've heard the saying before, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Okay? I would say the power and beauty of radio are in the ear of the beholder. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy yourselves.
Thanks, Robin. Okay, we can come back in for those that are outside, and we can start rounding up. Okay, if everyone that's outside, if we can just call all those colleagues that are outside just to join us as well as we start wrapping up for the session, and then we can break, we can close up and have lunch. Okay, so colleagues outside, if I think somebody can just call the colleagues outside to come in, then we can start rounding up. I see everyone is standing outside. Okay, colleagues outside, if you can please make your way in quickly. Thank you. Thanks, Taban. Just please call them inside. Thanks. Okay, as they come inside, colleagues, we are now wrapping up the last few minutes. As we wrap up, the one thing that the outcome of this particular initiative is to really have some resolutions as we go forward. And while my two colleagues, Prof. Charlie and Prof. Madise, also prepare themselves for some last words, since the dean is out. Just some last words. To wrap up, I'll give you an opportunity now to wrap up some last words, but some resolutions, right? So we need to think about, we went to this 2 days, extensive 2 days, but if we do not take this forward with some action points, it means that we sat for 2 days with just hearing and listening. It becomes a talk show. So we need to think about what are the action points, at least 2 to 3 action points that we can say that when we leave here, we want to see this as our way forward, right? So let's open up the space. What would you see as action points? Anybody?
Thank you so much, Denzel. I think that from my own perspective, we have to find a way of making sure that we document the discussions and the great ideas that come from the engagements in the last 2 days. And it does not have to be in the form of, an academic journal, but it could be engagements that find their way in some sort of a publication. So I would strongly recommend that perhaps yourself and your team, you edit some document and make a call for inputs on that document, so that we can at least have something that we can show for the engagements that we've had in the last couple of hours.
Yeah, I think something like a summit procedure, proceedings, that comes out. Yeah, I think that's less academic, but to the point of what we want to capture. Okay, so we've got that as one action point. Other action points as we go forward? Yes, bro.
Yes. Thank you, Denzel. And I think this summit, 2-day summit, should not actually be a once-off thing. It's important to always make reference to this day going forward, because the digital world is forever changing, it's evolving, and it's evolving very fast. We need to basically not be in a position of doing a catch-up, but be on the same par with this evolution of this digital world. That, for me, I think that's the action we need to take, and always say, how often can we actually refresh our minds as to where we're coming from, where we are, where we are going.
Right. Perfect. So more of these kind of discursive spaces. Okay, we get that. Third, please go ahead.
I think for me, on a practical level, in our department, we're developing curriculum, developing new programs, and I think this will come in very handy in what we've been speaking about in terms of preparing students for the future work environment, and developing or bringing in psychology into all of this, not making students far from the technology, not creating content that is devoid of all of this, but as we develop our curriculum to also include some of these, not only the assistive technology, but preparing just for this future world of work. So that's my takeaway from this. And also the ethics. I think we've been speaking a lot about the ethics around AI and all these technologies. And although I'm not going away with clear answers with all of this, but having to teach it to students, I think we can add a level of integrity in how we use these. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, other action points as we go forward?
I think I have 2 action points. One, I think we need to go back to our strategic plan for the next 5 years, because there's elements that I realize that are missing now since we've reviewed the strategic plan. So like the integration of assistive technologies, there's missing gaps that we could really integrate into our 5-year plan. And then I think for another action point is that what I felt as missing throughout the summit was more a
Okay, just tap it. I think they should put the volume up on it. That it is. Okay, can we get another microphone, colleagues?
And the last one is a interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary discussion, right? So amongst the humanities and digitization. So in terms of how do we do that interdisciplinary along with technology between different various departments and disciplines. Thank you.
From my side, I think we can have working teams or task teams. Yes, so that it can be integrated. AI can be integrated in all areas of performances, like in social, community engagement, research, and all aspects. So if CHS, for instance, in UNISA can have a task team, that will ensure that AI is integrated.
Okay. Perfect.
I unfortunately have no concrete suggestion as to how to do this, but I think we need to get students more involved. The student presentations were very interesting, and they have a very different relationship with technologies, often far more informed, far more practical, far more advanced, and it would be interesting to get their input.
Yeah, I think that came out quite came quite strongly, is that we must bring the student voice more actively in this. Okay, any other points, action points forward? Anybody else? Okay, we got one in the back, one more.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is to focus on our circle of influence. Most of the time, I think people are talking a lot about Donald Trump. He's uncontrollable. We cannot control him. That is not our circle of influence. We take cognizance of what's happening globally. But what is important is that we need to look at our students, as people say, but also what role can, for instance, UNISA Radio play in assisting matriculants at the end of the year via the radio. I think there's lots of means that we can use. We can liaise with the University of Stellenbosch and other education departments that use telematics, because at some stages, there are some people that don't have access or frequency in their particular environments. But I think that is important. And then also I think we need also to look at a visionary. What will we change so that we don't attract followers, but we attract leaders? Are we attracting followers or leaders? If you attract leaders, you have more, your zone of influence expand. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Front here, Sivan. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think what we also need is continuation. Continuation of these events, which build our confidence, which brings us together and reminds us what we're trying to build, where we're building towards, how are we building, and also so that we learn from each other continuously, because what we experienced here today is that there are things happening in different spheres and they're in different disciplines, and we can work together in order to make them bigger and better.
Quite important for us is to break that silos out. I mean, when we started to sit together across different institutions, different organizations, we realized that there's critical work that we can sort of duplicating, we simply enhance the work that has been done. Okay, anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, perfect. Oh, we got one more. Okay, Professor van Wyk.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether we have indicated stakeholders, because what I see on the banner, there's one. I think there's a big stakeholder, higher education and training. So how can we in humanities have particular stakeholders also their voices? So when we now looking futuristic, the type of students we want to give to the stakeholder, that is important. I'm not sure whether we will look into that, but that is a critical part of where we want to drive the advancing African digital humanities. If the psychologists are here, they will tell us, you using AI, also using AI in our work, how can you adapt that to your current practices and your pedagogies so that we can narrow the gap? I attended the TVET College conference, and there was more than 8 stakeholders from Caterpillar and all that stuff. But there was only a small number, and so on. I believe that art must be, where's the other stakeholders? So let us also think about that, maybe bring them bit by bit into the space so that they can see whether we are busy preparing our students for that particular market. Otherwise, we have to do the things over, and then they said our programs is irrelevant. Thank you.
Exactly, and I think as we start thinking of curriculum reform, that becomes more critical for us.
I'm sorry, I talked a lot. I want to ask if it's possible that we create a kind of website or database or something where people can perhaps come with project ideas. Because often, like me, for example, I'm an academic and I have grand ideas of what I would like to do in terms of, say, podcasting or what have you, but I've absolutely no idea how to do it, who to network with, who are the IT people, who are the legal people, who are the copyright people, etc., etc., etc. So if there's a kind of platform where we can showcase our skills and expertise, but also maybe request our needs and have the community respond to it.
Exactly, and I think what we can do is look at a digital humanities community of practice, an African digital humanities community of practice. And I know Richard is busy with a platform at the moment, so we could look at that, Richard, as part of the platform as well, an online community of practice for that. Okay, last opportunity for anybody before we conclude. Anyone else? Okay, perfect.